My parents thought they were selling an old watch for a few $100s. But hidden inside it was a secret my grandfather trusted only me to uncover. By the time they realized what they had thrown away, it was already too late, and what happened next tore our family apart forever. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Brenna Calloway. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Colorado. A few months ago, I got the phone call I had been dreading for years. My grandfather, Orson Calloway, had passed away peacefully in his sleep. He wasn't just my grandfather. He was the one person in my family who always made me feel seen, respected, and loved. I packed my bags and drove back to the small town where I grew up. The whole drive felt unreal. Every mile brought back memories of summers spent in Grandpa's workshop, listening to his stories and learning little lessons about life that made more sense as I got older. When I arrived at my parents' house, everything felt cold. Family members walked around quietly, preparing for the funeral, but something felt different. Grandpa's warm presence was gone, and the house no longer felt like home. After the funeral, I wandered through his old room, hoping to feel close to him one last time. As I looked around, I noticed something was missing. The antique pocket watch that Grandpa always kept with him was nowhere to be found. He never left it lying around, and he certainly never let anyone borrow it. I walked downstairs and asked my parents if they knew where it was. My father barely looked up before saying they had already sold it to a local antique dealer. My mother shrugged and said it was just an old watch collecting dust, and that someone had offered a decent price for it. I stared at them, waiting for one of them to laugh and say they were joking, but they didn't. They had really sold it only days after Grandpa died. My heart sank. That watch had always meant something to Grandpa. He never explained why, but he protected it like it was the most important thing he owned. A few weeks before he passed away, while I was helping him sit on the porch, he quietly placed his hand over mine and looked me straight in the eyes. In a calm voice, he said, "One day you'll understand why no one else must have it." At the time, I thought he was talking about the memories connected to it. Standing there in my parents' living room, hearing they had sold it without a second thought, I suddenly knew he had meant something much bigger. A heavy feeling settled in my chest, and deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. When I was growing up, I slowly realized that my place in the family was different from my brother Keegan's. He was 3 years younger than me, but everything always seemed to revolve around him. If he made a mistake, my parents found an excuse for it. If I made the smallest mistake, I was reminded of it for weeks. It became normal for me to stay quiet, because speaking up never changed anything. I worked hard in school and tried my best at everything I did, hoping one day they would be proud of me. That day never came. When there wasn't enough money for something, I was expected to give it up. If I wanted to join a school trip or take a class that cost extra, my parents would say the family couldn't afford it. A few weeks later, they somehow found money for one of Keegan's hobbies or another expensive gift for him. I stopped asking for things because I already knew the answer. The only person who noticed how I felt was Grandpa Orson. He never made big speeches or argued with my parents in front of me. Instead, he spent time with me whenever he could. He invited me to help him fix old furniture, organize his tools, and work around his small workshop. While we worked, he shared stories from his life. He told me that people show their true character through their actions, not their words. He said life is not always fair, but giving up your values only creates more pain later. Those conversations stayed with me long after I grew up. Grandpa believed I could build a good life even if others failed to see my worth. Whenever I doubted myself, he reminded me to stand on my own feet and never depend on someone else's approval. He wanted me to become strong without becoming bitter. Looking back, I think he understood much more about our family than he ever said out loud. There was one thing he always kept close to him, no matter where he went. It was his old pocket watch. I saw it almost every time I visited him. Sometimes he would take it out, hold it quietly for a few moments, then place it back in his pocket without saying a word. As a child, I once reached for it because I thought it looked beautiful. He gently stopped my hand and smiled. There was no anger in his face. He simply told me that some things must wait until the right time. Years later, when I was older, I asked him why that watch mattered so much. He looked at it for a long moment before saying only 4 words that I never forgot. It carries unfinished promises. He didn't explain anything else. I respected his wishes and never asked again, but those words stayed in my mind. Even then, I felt that the watch was connected to something much bigger than our family understood. The next morning, I drove to the antique shop my parents had mentioned. I hoped the watch was still there and that I could simply buy it back. The owner was an older man with kind eyes. I explained who I was and asked about my grandfather's pocket watch. He looked at me with a little surprise before shaking his head. He told me the watch had been sold almost as soon as it arrived. I felt my heart sink. I asked if he remembered who bought it. At first, he seemed unsure about sharing any details, but after hearing that the watch had belonged to my grandfather, he decided to tell me what he could. He said the buyer was a private collector who had left special instructions years ago. If an old pocket watch belonging to Orson Calloway ever came into the shop, he wanted to be contacted immediately. The owner said he had always thought the request was strange because he had never even heard the name Orson Calloway before. I stood there in complete shock. It made no sense. My grandfather lived a quiet life. He wasn't famous or wealthy. Almost nobody outside our family even knew he owned that watch. So how could a stranger have been waiting for it? The more I thought about it, the less it made sense. I asked the owner if he had the collector's name or phone number, but he politely refused. He said he had to respect his customer's privacy. I thanked him anyway and walked back to my car with more questions than answers. Instead of going home, I drove straight to Grandpa's workshop. Most of his belongings were still there because my parents had focused on selling the expensive-looking items first. The workshop was quiet, just as he had left it. His tools were neatly arranged, and everything had its place. I looked through drawers, shelves, and old boxes, hoping to find something that explained why someone had been searching for the watch. Hours passed before I noticed a worn notebook tucked behind a row of dusty wooden boxes. It wasn't something that could be seen easily. I carefully opened it and recognized Grandpa's handwriting right away. Every page was filled with notes, sketches, and short messages. Some pages showed strange drawings of hidden compartments inside old objects. Others had copies of railroad maps with certain locations marked by hand. There were also dates going back many years, long before I was born. Near the middle of the notebook, I found a sentence that made me stop breathing for a moment. Grandpa had written, "A promise should never be broken, even if it takes a lifetime to keep it." There was no explanation of what promise he meant. I slowly turned more pages, realizing this notebook wasn't filled with random thoughts. It was leading somewhere. For the first time, I understood that Grandpa had left behind a trail for someone to follow, and somehow, that someone was me. I took the notebook home and spent the entire evening reading every page carefully. Grandpa had written in a simple way, but he never explained things directly. Many pages pointed to other pages, and some words were underlined while others were circled. It felt like he expected someone to solve a puzzle instead of simply reading a story. I grabbed a pen and a piece of paper and started connecting the clues. Little by little, they began to make sense. One page showed a drawing of a pocket watch with small arrows pointing beneath the moving gears. Another page had measurements that matched the size of Grandpa's watch exactly. There was also a sentence that said, "The answer is never on the surface." I read that line several times before I understood what he meant. Grandpa wasn't talking about life this time. He was talking about the watch itself. Hidden beneath its moving parts was a secret compartment that could only be opened by someone who knew where to look. As I kept reading, I found another page that explained what was supposed to be inside. Grandpa had hidden a tiny brass key along with a folded note. He never described the note in detail, but he wrote that both items had to stay together. One without the other could cause confusion. The next few pages finally explained why he had protected the watch for so many years. Decades earlier, Grandpa and my grandmother had opened a safe deposit box at a local bank. They placed something valuable inside and agreed that only the right person should ever have access to it. After Grandma passed away, Grandpa became the only person who knew the full truth. He believed that if the wrong people discovered the key too soon, everything they had worked to protect could be lost. That was why he carried the watch everywhere and trusted almost no one with it. My hands started shaking as I closed the notebook. The collector who bought the watch probably had no idea that a hidden compartment even existed. But if he ever discovered it, he would also find the key and the note. He would have everything needed to unlock whatever my grandparents had hidden all those years ago. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to missing all of this. If I had never searched Grandpa's workshop, I would have believed the watch was simply a family keepsake. Instead, I now knew it was protecting something much bigger. Grandpa hadn't guarded it because it was expensive. He had guarded it because it carried the only way to reach something he had promised to keep safe. At that moment, I realized I wasn't just trying to recover an old watch anymore. I was racing against time before someone else uncovered a secret that my grandfather had spent most of his life protecting. After reading Grandpa's notebook, I decided to tell my parents that the watch was more important than they realized. I hoped they would understand and help me find the collector. Instead, the conversation quickly turned into an argument. My father became angry the moment I mentioned the notebook. He said I was making up stories because I couldn't accept that Grandpa was gone. My mother agreed with him and told me to stop living in the past. When I asked for the name of the antique dealer again, they acted like I was causing unnecessary trouble over an old family item. Their reaction didn't feel normal. It felt like they were hiding something. The more questions I asked, the more uncomfortable they became. A few days later, I started looking through old papers that had been left on the dining room table after the funeral. Most of them were bills, receipts, and bank envelopes. I wasn't searching for private information, but one document caught my attention. It showed a large payment that had been made only days before Grandpa died. The amount was far more money than my parents normally had. I quietly wrote down the company name and later visited the office listed on the paperwork. The employee couldn't give me every detail, but after checking the account, she confirmed the payment had been made to settle a personal debt. She also mentioned that the debt belonged to Keegan. My stomach dropped. I already knew my brother had made poor choices over the years, but I never imagined things had become this serious. Later that evening, I spoke with one of Keegan's old friends. He didn't know everything, but he admitted Keegan had been gambling for a long time. At first, it started with small bets, but eventually he borrowed money from the wrong people. The debt kept growing until he couldn't pay it anymore. My parents had found out only recently. Instead of making Keegan face the consequences, they decided to rescue him once again. They needed money quickly, so they began selling Grandpa's belongings almost immediately after his death. They didn't stop to think about memories or family history. They only saw things they could turn into cash. Hearing the truth hurt more than I expected. Every piece of Grandpa's life had been treated like it meant nothing. His furniture, his tools, his collections, and finally his pocket watch had all been sold because my parents wanted to protect the son they had always chosen over me. They never asked my opinion. They never even considered what Grandpa might have wanted. Standing outside that evening, I felt a deep sadness that had nothing to do with money. It was the realization that the people who should have respected Grandpa the most had erased parts of his life without hesitation. At that moment, I understood that if I wanted to honor Grandpa's final wishes, I would have to do it alone because I could no longer trust my own family. I knew I couldn't waste any more time. The notebook had given me enough clues to continue searching, but I still needed to find the man who had bought Grandpa's watch. I returned to the antique shop one more time. This time, I politely explained everything I had discovered. I told the owner that I wasn't trying to take the watch away from anyone. I only needed the chance to see it because it was connected to my grandfather's final wishes. He stayed quiet for a long moment before finally saying that he believed I was telling the truth. He reached into a drawer, took out a business card, and slid it across the counter. Printed on it was the name Sterling Voss and a business address a few hours away. I thanked him and left immediately. The drive felt longer than it really was. I kept wondering what kind of man would spend years waiting for Grandpa's watch to appear. When I arrived at the address, I found a large but simple office. Sterling Voss welcomed me without surprise, almost as if he had expected someone from Grandpa's family to come one day. He was an elderly man with calm eyes and a gentle voice. Before I could explain everything, he invited me to sit down and asked if I was Orson Calloway's granddaughter. When I answered yes, he smiled sadly. Sterling told me that he and Grandpa had known each other since they were very young. They had worked together for several years and had shared many difficult experiences. During that time, they made a promise that neither of them would ever break, no matter how many years passed. Sterling explained that he had never wanted the watch because it was valuable. He had been searching for it because he believed one day it would help complete the promise they had made together. He admitted that after losing contact with Grandpa many years earlier, the watch became the only clue he had left. I showed him Grandpa's notebook. He carefully turned each page, and I could see emotion on his face. When he finished reading, he looked at me and said Grandpa had trusted the right person. He believed I deserved to know the truth because I had followed the clues instead of giving up. Sterling carefully placed the watch on a table and opened it with special tools. He removed the small moving parts one by one until a hidden compartment appeared beneath them. Inside was exactly what Grandpa had described in the notebook. A tiny brass key rested beside a neatly folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as Sterling carefully unfolded it. On the outside, written in Grandpa's familiar handwriting, were the words, "For Brenna and no one else." Tears filled my eyes as I realized Grandpa had known that one day I would find my way to this very moment. I carefully unfolded Grandpa's letter and began reading it. Every word felt like he was sitting beside me one last time. He started by saying that if I was reading the letter, then I had already shown the patience and honesty he always believed I had. He wrote that he wished things had been different, but life had taught him to prepare for difficult choices. As I continued reading, my eyes filled with tears. Grandpa admitted that he had expected his son to sell his belongings after his death. He didn't write those words with anger. Instead, he wrote them with sadness. He explained that over the years he had watched Dorian make decisions based on money instead of family. Because of that, Grandpa decided long ago that he could not trust him with the responsibility of protecting what mattered most. That was why he had never told anyone else about the true purpose of the pocket watch. He wanted the secret to remain safe until I found it myself. Grandpa wrote that trust had to be earned through actions, not simply given because someone shared the same last name. He thanked me for every visit, every conversation, and every quiet afternoon we spent together. He said I had never asked him for money or gifts. I simply gave him my time, and to him, that had always been priceless. Then the letter explained what the brass key was meant to open. It belonged to a safe deposit box that he and Grandma had opened many years before. Inside were important legal papers, old family records, and valuable assets they had protected together. Grandpa made it clear that everything inside was meant only for me. He wanted me to use it wisely and never allow greed to change who I was. One sentence stayed with me more than any other. He wrote, "Real inheritance is not decided by blood. It is earned by character." I had to stop reading for a moment because I couldn't hold back my tears. Those words carried more meaning than anything I had ever received. Grandpa wasn't simply leaving me valuable things. He was leaving me his complete trust. Sterling quietly gave me time to collect myself before speaking again. He told me Grandpa had often talked about me with pride. He said Grandpa believed kindness and honesty were worth more than money because those qualities lasted much longer. Hearing that made me both grateful and heartbroken. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside its envelope. I knew my life had changed forever, but not because of whatever waited inside the safe deposit box. It changed because Grandpa had given me something that no one could ever take away. Even after he was gone, he had found a way to remind me that I had always been enough, even when the rest of my family failed to see it. A few days later, Sterling and I went to the bank together. After showing the proper identification and using the brass key, the manager led us into a private room. A small metal box was placed on the table in front of us. My heart was beating so fast that I could hardly breathe. I slowly unlocked the box and lifted the lid. Inside, everything had been neatly organized. There were folders filled with legal papers, several envelopes, old family records, certificates for long-term investments, and a collection of rare coins and valuable keepsakes that had been carefully protected for many years. Grandpa and Grandma had preserved everything with great care. One large envelope contained the final version of Grandpa's estate plan. I read every page slowly. The documents clearly explained that Grandpa had updated his estate after years of watching how my parents treated our family. He had written that his decisions were made freely and without pressure from anyone. Independent witnesses had signed every document, and everything had been prepared by an experienced attorney. There was no confusion about his wishes. Grandpa had legally left everything inside the safe deposit box to me. Along with the legal papers were several personal letters. In one of them, Grandpa explained that he had watched me quietly carry burdens that should never have been mine. He wrote that I had shown kindness without expecting rewards, while others had placed their own interests above family. He hoped his final decision would protect the things he and Grandma had spent a lifetime building. It didn't take long for my parents to learn what had happened. They became furious and demanded that I hand everything over immediately. They insisted Grandpa would never have made such a decision on his own. My father accused me of turning Grandpa against the family, and my mother claimed I had somehow convinced him to change his will. They even threatened to take me to court. Their lawyer carefully reviewed every document before giving them the truth they didn't want to hear. Everything had been completed properly. The signatures matched. The witnesses confirmed Grandpa's decisions. The attorney who prepared the papers had kept detailed records of every meeting. There was nothing my parents could challenge. As the truth became known, other relatives began asking questions. Some of Grandpa's longtime friends also shared stories about how often he had worried about me. Many people finally saw the unfair treatment that had been hidden inside our family for years. The picture my parents had created began falling apart. They could no longer pretend everything had been equal between Keegan and me. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't have to argue or prove my worth. Grandpa had already done that through his own words and decisions. The truth spoke louder than any accusation, and no amount of anger could erase what he had carefully put into place before he said goodbye. Not long after everything became official, Keegan asked to meet me. We sat across from each other at a quiet diner where we used to eat as kids. For a few minutes, neither of us said anything. Then he finally looked down at the table and admitted the truth. He said he had known about the gambling debt from the beginning because it was his debt. When the people he owed started demanding payment, he became scared and asked our parents for help. Instead of telling him to accept responsibility, they searched for the fastest way to get money. Keegan admitted that he had agreed when they decided to sell Grandpa's belongings before anyone else could stop them. He said he convinced himself that Grandpa was gone and wouldn't care anymore. Hearing those words hurt more than I expected. He apologized, but his apology felt too late. Grandpa's memories had already been scattered. Some things were gone forever, and nothing could bring them back. I quietly listened until he finished speaking. Then I told him that being honest now did not erase the choices he had made. Every decision had consequences, and this was one of them. Soon after that meeting, my parents contacted me again. This time they asked me to divide Grandpa's inheritance equally, because we were still family. They said sharing everything would help everyone move forward. I calmly refused. Grandpa had made his wishes very clear. Giving away what he had trusted me to protect would only ignore everything he had tried to teach me. I wasn't refusing because I wanted revenge. I was refusing because rewarding betrayal would disrespect the man who had believed in me all my life. Instead of spending the inheritance on expensive things, I chose to use part of it to restore Grandpa's old workshop. I repaired the roof, replaced broken windows, cleaned every shelf, and carefully returned the tools that I had been able to recover. I framed old family photographs and placed them on the walls beside Grandpa's workbench. His notebooks, letters, and family records were organized inside cabinets where they would be protected for future generations. Working there every day brought me peace. I wasn't simply fixing an old building. I was saving a part of Grandpa's life that almost disappeared because of greed. Every repaired chair, every polished tool, and every cleaned corner reminded me of the lessons he had shared with me over the years. My relationship with my parents and Keegan never recovered after that. Too much trust had been broken, and some wounds could not be repaired. I accepted that with sadness, not anger. Families are built on love, honesty, and respect. Once those things are lost, sharing the same last name is no longer enough to keep people together. Grandpa understood that long before I did, and now I finally understood it too. Several months passed, and life slowly became peaceful again. One quiet afternoon, I unlocked the door to Grandpa's workshop and stepped inside. Sunlight came through the windows, filling the room with a warm glow. Everything looked exactly the way I believed Grandpa would have wanted. The smell of old wood, clean tools, and fresh paint reminded me of the many hours we had spent there together. For the first time since his passing, walking into that room no longer filled me with sadness alone. It also brought comfort. On a wooden shelf near his workbench sat Grandpa's pocket watch. After everything that had happened, Sterling had insisted that it belonged with me. I placed it inside a glass display case where it would always be protected. Beside it rested Grandpa's handwritten letter. Sometimes I opened the case just to read a few lines again. His words continued to guide me whenever life felt uncertain. Standing there, I thought about everything that had happened over the past months. I had started this journey believing I was only trying to recover a family keepsake. Instead, I uncovered years of hidden truths that changed the way I looked at my family forever. Betrayal has a strange way of revealing who people really are. Some people choose honesty, even when it is difficult. Others choose money, excuses, and selfish decisions. In the end, everyone showed their true character through the choices they made. My parents had spent so many years protecting the wrong things. They believed money could solve every problem and fix every mistake. Instead, it cost them something far more valuable. They lost the trust of their daughter. That loss could never be replaced by any amount of money. I no longer carried anger toward them, but I also understood that forgiveness does not always rebuild a broken relationship. As for me, I realized that Grandpa had left me something much greater than an inheritance. He gave me confidence that I had never truly felt before. Even during the years when I questioned my own worth, he had quietly believed in me. He trusted my heart more than my last name. Knowing that became the greatest gift I could ever receive. Before leaving the workshop that evening, I picked up the pocket watch one last time. I held it in my hand and listened to its quiet ticking. It reminded me that time keeps moving no matter what happens. But this watch had never been important because it measured time. It had protected the truth until the right person was ready to discover it. Grandpa had planned everything with patience, wisdom, and love. I carefully placed the watch back into its case, turned off the lights, and closed the door behind me. As I walked toward my car, I smiled for the first time in a long while. The past would always be part of me, but it no longer controlled my future. I finally had justice, peace, and the strength to move forward, carrying Grandpa's lessons with me every single day.